The Archangel Chronicles by Raymond. Copyright 2022, all rights reserved. Chapter 15. Herod's Visitors. Herod, king of Judea, called by some the Great, son of Antipater, lord of Judea, Galilee, and Idumea, friend of Caesar, builder of cities and the second temple, patron of the Olympic Games and the Jewish diaspora, sat on his high-backed throne, brooding. It was a black, moonless night, the longest night of the year. He sat brooding in the cavernous halls of his palace in Jerusalem. He sat amidst the shadows, the great hall being dimly lit by oil lamps, which casted fantastic shadows amidst the hollows, hidden corners, and pillars of the great hall. He sat for hours, awake during the deep marches of the night, sitting tilted forward, his bearded chin upon his breast, his whole body rocking slowly back and forth with each labored breath. The shadows swirling around him were no more impenetrable, no darker, and no more terrible than those consuming his soul. His mind was fixed on a constant inner voice that would not stop, pushing out any comfort, any peace from his troubled mind. "How long has it been since I have been able to sleep?" he thought. "How long will the blessed oblivion of Hypnos, son of Nyx and brother of Thantos, elude me? How long must I be tortured here in the quiet and darkness of my palace before I am allowed some rest? How long before these flaming darts of regret cease to burn my soul?" From the back of the hall, out of the nebulous darkness, came a whispered answer. "Never." Herod squinted into the flickering shadows. "Who is that?" he groaned, looking up. He tensed, gold-ringed fingers desperately grasping the arms of his high-backed throne, leaning forward, eyes alert, for the apparition he knew was coming. Herod discerned a clinking, shifting sound of chains and a rustle of fabric in the gloom. Slowly, his eyes adjusting to the murk, a shimmering figure of a very beautiful woman, clothed in gossamer white gowns, trailing cobweb strands, floated towards him and into the flickering lamplight. She was tall, erect, and wasp-waisted. Her dark eyes, set in a flawless alabaster face, reflected the oil lamplight back at him like two sapphires, burning into his memory. Sensuous lips, painted black, revealed ivory-white teeth, smiling at him cruelly. Her hair, obsidian black, reflected the dancing flames of the lamps like a dark mirror. The phantom glided forward, barefooted, and stood before Herod. Her hands and feet were bound with golden chains. Her head was crowned with a gold diadem, the mounted jewels throwing out sparks as it reflected the lamplight. "Hello, my husband king. Have you missed me?" Herod shuddered. He sprang to his feet, but suddenly lightheaded, he sank down to his knees and seemed to bow before the apparition. He closed his eyes, and when the dizziness passed, he stumbled back up to his feet and looked at her. She was still there, like she was every night. "My king, surely you are not frightened of me?" "Frightened? Frightened? You cannot harm me. You are past harming me with your plots and schemes. You are past humiliating me, looking down at me, sneering at my bloodline, and plotting to restore your Hasmonean dynasty. Why should I fear you? Begone! Begone, Mariamne! Depart this place and my kingdom forever!" The apparition glided forward, her pale face, those dark lips, coming so close to Herod's. She blew a kiss towards Herod's face. The icy coldness of that breath was like an arctic wind piercing his very soul. The light flickered. He lost all strength and fell back with a thud into his chair. He looked up weakly at the apparition and asked again, "What do you want with me?" "Why, Herod, my king, I can see that you are frightened of me. You are afraid to know that you once loved me. You wish to forget that I possessed you, but you never possessed me, did you? That is why you are afraid, poor creature. Why do you torture me like this every night, every waking moment?" "It is my curse and your destiny, my love," she said, "to never forget the love that you killed, to remind you of what you lost." Mariamne held out her arms, hands chained together at the wrist with golden links. "You remember these chains, my love? You put them on me. You thought they would bind me. You thought they would enslave me to you. You thought that I would bow to you, as if a Hasmonean would bow to an Idumean, an outsider." Herod, now moved to tears, pleaded with Mariamne. "I did love you. I would have sold my soul to the devil to have you. You and I were betrothed. I agreed to a kataba with your parents. You were to be my queen, uniting the house of my father to the house of the Hasmoneans. I would be king of all Judea. I would love you and sire a new dynasty, the greatest in the history of the Jews. But you would be my wife, and you would love me." Mariamne hissed, "Ah, love you? How could I love a common Idumean? You did not love me. You wanted to possess me, and you never knew the difference." Mariamne came closer and kissed Herod on his forehead. The kiss was icy cold. She backed away, looking at Herod, now sobbing in his chair. Poor man. Herod sprang to his feet, clenched his fists, and raised them over his head. You were always against me, vile woman. You schemed and plotted against me, always. I did my duty, my love, she said, though I was repelled by your touch and could not bear being in your presence. I still bore you 2 sons. You remember them, don't you, my love? Herod looked up, his face frozen in terror. Mariamne continued, talking in smooth, ironic tones. Alexandros and Aristobulus, I have brought them here with me. She turned, and out of the gloom, 2 beautiful, tall, athletic youths with long golden hair glided out of the shadows. Their skin shimmered as if illuminated by morning sunlight. Hello, Father King, said the tallest of the 2. You do remember me, Aristobulus, don't you? He smiled. Together, the 2 youths raised their arms, chained at the wrists, and bowed to Herod. Herod shrank back into his throne. He pulled up his legs, shivering, and went into a fetal position, trying to bury his face into the back of the throne. You all, he shuddered. Betrayed you, Mariamne said, completing a sentence. Yes, you think we all betrayed you, didn't we? Yes, you know you did, Herod hissed furtively. You all betrayed me. Mariamne laughed, her voice echoing through the hall. Betrayal? Loyalty? She said. What does all that mean to you, my love? Why do you torture me like this? Herod shouted. Mariamne laughed again. Torture? Well, that's a word well known to you, isn't it, my love? She raised her chained wrists and opened the palms of her hands to Herod. Torture is the one thing in life you were very good at, wasn't it? She slowly put her hands down. Do you remember, my love, my younger brother, 17 years old, when you took him under your protection? You made him high priest. Jonathan Aristobulus, whom we named our son after. She motioned, and out of the shadows came another tall, golden youth, dressed in a long white tunic, his wrists also chained together with golden links. Mariamne looked to her brother, the elder Aristobulus. My brother was such a beautiful youth, wasn't he? You were jealous of him, and you feared him. He was stronger and faster and smarter than you. He was a Hasmonean. He was beloved by the people, wasn't he? She walked over to her brother. She caressed his face. She stood behind him and placed her manacled hands upon his shoulders and looked over to Herod. But he was too beautiful, too strong, and too beloved. You thought he was a threat to you, even though he said or did nothing against you. Mariamne pushed down on her brother's shoulders. He knelt down and lifted up his stretched arms. She grasped his manacles, and they unfastened. She lifted up her arms, which were now bound with 2 sets of shackles. She looked at Herod. And so, my love, in secrecy, by the hand of 2 of your Gallic guards, You had him drowned in the royal pool in Jericho, out of sight, hoping that he would be forgotten. And so perished my little brother, the high priest of Israel. Jonathan Aristobulus now stood, bowed his head, and receded back into the shadows. And my love, you do remember your sister, Salome, who is still here in this very palace? Of course you do. But you were blind to her evil and her lies, because you think that she was loyal to you. You listened to her poisoned whispers, didn't you? You wanted to believe her lies. "Leave me alone," shouted Herod. "I cannot bear it anymore." You cannot bear it, because you know how the story ends, don't you, my love? She said. The second youth now came forward. "You remember me, Lord King and loving Father? Alexandros, your firstborn son by my mother here. Surely you remember what happened to me." And then the younger Aristobulus, the second-born, moved forward to stand with his brother in front of Mariamne. Mariamne now motioned to the shadows at the back of the hall. Out of the darkness and into the flickering lamplight shuffled a gray-haired, powerfully built man, hands and feet bound with iron chains. "Hello, my king, my nephew. You remember me, your father's brother Joseph, your uncle. You left me to guard your queen while you went to see Mark Antony to plead for your kingdom after the first Roman Civil War. Do you remember those deadly lies your sister Salome told about me? Remember how she whispered deceptions, that I had taken your wife, and that Mariamne had also been unfaithful with Salome's own husband? Do you remember how you left me to guard Mariamne and keep her safe while you went to Antony and Cleopatra to plead your case? And you forgot those secret orders you left with me, didn't you? To kill your beloved Mariamne and your own children if you did not come back, so that they would perish with you as a sign of love." Herod struggled to his feet again, defiant, seething with rage, fists clenched, facing his uncle Joseph. Mariamne now stepped in front of Herod. "Was that not the command that you gave him, my love? To destroy me so that no one else could have me?" "Woman," shouted Herod, "your words betray you. Eager I was to see you, my love, when I returned triumphant from that meeting. I sought you out. I needed to know if those rumors of your faithlessness to me were true." Mariamne's eyes bored into Herod, and she said, with cold determination, "And I denied this accusation, and I swore holy oaths that these were lies." "And I believed you," Herod quavered. "I embraced you with tears in my eyes and joy in my heart. But you slayed that joy, for you said to me, 'Did you not command Joseph that if any harm came to me, I was to perish also?' Did you not tell me that?" Herod, shaking his fists to the ceiling, cried, "Woman, why do you torment me? Your very words prove that you had been on intimate terms with my uncle." Mariamne came forward and put her hands on Herod's. Again she looked deeply into his eyes. "And so you went to Rome, after the Battle of Actium, after Octavian defeated Mark Antony and Cleopatra, you were in jeopardy again. You needed to make new terms with him. We all expected you to fail. We all expected that you were not coming back. Yes, my queen, Herod said, looking up at her. And I expected a warm welcome back from my wife, my queen. But there you stood, moaning that my good fortune was bad news for you. Herod sprang to his feet. He tore at his hair. He rent his gowns and threw them off, standing half naked. He grasped the diadem on his head and flung it at Mariamne. It passed through her with no effect and clanged loudly on the stone floor. Mariamne stood tall and proud and was not disturbed. Are those tears for me, my love? Pity. I do not think so. Those tears are for yourself. Herod reached out, grasping for his throne to steady himself. He stumbled back onto the seat, head down. He held out a hand as if to block out any view of Mariamne. You have said enough. Begone. I will answer no more. I will say no more. Go back to where you came from. Leave me in peace. Peace? You ask again for peace? Why, that only comes to those who seek it. You sought power, my love, not peace. Why should you be left in peace when you have sent so many of us to our doom? Enough! Enough! I cannot abide any more, shouted Herod. And so, my love, you gave orders to slay your uncle Joseph, without proof, without trial, giving him no chance to tell the truth. She glided over to Joseph, and holding out her arms, received his chains from him. Joseph dissolved back into the shadows. And then, my love, you remember old John Hyrcanus, my grandfather? The only male Hasmonean left alive that could contest your kingdom? You remember him, don't you? She turned again to the shadows, as another elderly man, dressed in rags, covered with chains, came forward into the lamplight. He came forward to Mariamne. She received his chains, and turning to Herod, said, And so you had him killed, leaving me and your 2 sons as the last of the Hasmoneans. John Hyrcanus dissolved back into the shadows. Mariamne, now bearing all of these chains, came back to Herod. Her lips parted in another cruel smile. But that is not all, my love. There is more, so much more, and you shall have it all in full measure, she whispered to him. She continued, So, after switching your allegiance from Mark Antony and Cleopatra after Actium, and secure with your new relationship with Octavius, you summoned me to a trial, didn't you, my love? You despised me, and I loved you, murmured Herod. My love, she said, would I despise the man who killed my brother, executed my grandfather, imprisoned my mother, took away my boys, and separated me from my infant daughters? Should such a man be loved or admired? Did such a man as that deserve to be king, my love? She continued, And would I despise the man who sent me by myself to a tribunal of his own choosing, with no evidence and a predetermined verdict? Should I hate the man who sentenced me to death out of spite and jealousy? Mariamne paused. She glided up to the throne and grasped Herod's drooping head with her icy hands. I think not. I should not love such a creature. But I do pity him, for he has lost any goodness and greatness that was left in him. Releasing his head, she stepped back. She released the locks on her chains and all the other chains that she now bore, and placed them on Herod's wrists, where they locked with a clink. Stepping back, she put her hands to her black obsidian hair, sweeping the black curls aside, like Moses parting the sea. This revealed a long, elegant neck, with a ligature around it, making a deep red mark through the alabaster skin. Look and see, my love, what your devotion to me has wrought. She continued, speaking without emotion. Yes, my love, you had me strangled with a garrote. But that wasn't all, was it? Stop! Stop! Herod shouted, his chest heaving. No, my love, she replied. I will not stop. You must hear the end of the story. I know the end. Spare me. No, you will not be spared. You did all these things, and they must be remembered. It must be known that Herod the Great grieved for his wife Mariamne, the last of the Hasmoneans. He grieved not out of love, but because he could not possess her. And so... No, say no more, shouted Herod. So what did Herod do to his beloved, my love? He could not be without her. She was his queen. But he had killed her. He would be alone. No other wife could comfort him, even though he had 8 others. He couldn't let her go. So you know what he did? Herod was convulsed with shaking. Well, this is what he did, my love. Being the king he was, he ordered his beloved to be placed into a stone vat filled with honey to preserve her for all time, so he could look at her beauty, his beauty, any time he wished. In the dark marches of the night, when all in the palace were asleep, he would pull her out of that jar and gaze upon her beauty. And so, my love, his beloved Mariamne could not even rest in a tomb for eternity. This is why, my love, I have come to you each night to remind you, but you will not let me go. Herod looked away. An icy wind, like a scythe, cut through the hall and made him shiver. When he looked up again, she was gone. But now Alexandros and Aristobulus stepped forward. Devoted father and king, they said in unison, do you remember what happened to us? Herod, shivering in the cold, crownless and half-naked, his torn and now tattered garments lying at his feet, panted, exhausted, and looked upon his 2 sons. Dear father, said his son Aristobulus, do not rest. The story is not over yet. There is more to tell. For our dear father was not content at the death of his beloved Mariamne, for the blood of our mother's Hasmonean lineage and our physical beauty were admired by all the people. We were cheered by the crowds in all of the festivals. But, dear father, you were jealous of us, though we were your sons too. Herod was now past the point of resistance. He sprawled on his throne, covered in chains, drooling, breathing heavily, wide-eyed and watching his two sons. "Wait," echoed another voice from the shadows at the end of the hall. Herod grunted. Out of the shadows shuffled another manacled youth, similar in age to Alexandros and Aristobulus. He was tall, muscular, and athletic, and bore a strong resemblance to Herod. "Dear father, you must wait for me. I am part of the story too. You know me. I am the one who is most like you. I am your son, Antipater." Antipater came to stand beside his two half-brothers. "My mother, Doris, was once your queen as well, before Mariamne the Hasmonean. But you sent her away into exile with me. But I am no Hasmonean, not like these two. I was a Herodian through and through, and proud of it. And you brought me back, as insurance, shall we say?" Herod lifted a chained hand and weakly waved Antipater away. "No," he huffed. "I've had enough. I must rest." "Hear me, O King of Judah," said Alexandros. "Did you ever act as a wise king and father to your children? You were all against me. You were all vying for my favors like dogs at the foot of a table," gasped Herod in between labored breaths. "Dogs?" said Alexandros, looking at his brother Aristobulus and then to Antipater. All of them laughed, their sharp laughter reverberating through the halls. "My wise father," said Antipas, "even your dogs were treated better than we, your sons." All three of them now laughed raucously. "Even a dog can expect some justice, some reward for services to his master," said Aristobulus. "Even the great Augustus once said it was better to be Herod's pig than one of his sons." The laughter subsided. Alexandros continued, "Let me remind my dear father what happened in the next part of the story. Do you remember that creature Eurycles, whom young Antipater here bribed, bringing him to your court to sow distrust and drive a wedge between us? Antipas there, he was ambitious, and he had no royal Hasmonean blood. He was jealous of us and resolved to divorce us from your affections, so that he could be named heir to your kingdoms. You are always so quick to believe the worst about us, dear father, weren't you?" Antipas scoffed. "You were so naive, Alexandros. You played right into my hands. Eurycles worked his way into your friendship, like the worm that he was, through pretense and an ample use of a silver tongue. He pretended to be a close friend of your father-in-law, King Archelaus of Cappadocia. And you spoke freely about our good father, didn't you?" Alexandros looked first to Antipas and then to Herod, who now sat impassively on the throne. "Eurycles asked you, Antipas, how was it that you, the firstborn, was expected to overlook the machinations of my brother and I against you, as we coveted the throne?" Antipas answered, "And Eurycles told you that he was amazed at how you, Alexandros, son of a princess of the Hasmonean line, and the husband of Glaphyra, princess of Cappadocia, should accept the fact that a son of a common woman would inherit the throne." Antipas now turned to Aristobulus. "And Eurycles learned you and your brother to reveal your real feelings about our dear father. What was it you said? I quote, "My father is weak. He is afraid. He fears the Hasmonean name. We must do away with him before he does away with us. The nation will rejoice with us." Alexandros looked at his father. "And Eurycles revealed these indiscretions to you, Antipas, my father's pet, and you told these secrets to our dear father, embellishing it with phantom plots that we supposedly had hatched so as to stoke the royal paranoia. Wasn't that clever, my dear father? You believed that creature Eurycles over your own flesh and blood. You called Eurycles your savior and showered him with gifts. And the more you did that, the more fantastic these lies became." Aristobulus glided forward and stood directly before the throne. "Dear father, you always were interested in slander. Only those who shared your beliefs and embraced your anger won your approval. You sought out these lies and false reports and drank the poisonous draught of lies in full measure." Alexandros now beckoned to the shadows at the end of the hall, and there shuffled forth a score or more of torn and battered figures, ambling towards the throne, the sound of their chains and moans filling the hall. Alexandros now came forward and mounted the steps to the throne, towering above the seated Herod. Herod winced and turned away. "Now look, dear father," he said. "Here are the victims of the harvest of your interrogations. You bribed the infamous to come forth. These are the servants and slaves you had tortured. Do you remember, in particular, 2 of your bodyguards, Jucundus and Tyrannus? Come forward and greet your dear commander and great king." 2 of the apparitions clanked forward, bent over with chains, bloody and broken with wounds flowing and tattered garments. "Hello, my good king. Do you remember me, Jucundus?" moaned the taller of the 2. "Surely you remember, your majesty. You remember how your son Antipater here secretly sent his agents to you. Though we had served you faithfully throughout your reign, you chose to believe their lies. You wanted to believe the slander that we betrayed your trust and met secretly with 2 Hasmonean sons to plot your assassination. Do you remember how you had us tortured, broken on the rack, fingers crushed, teeth pulled out, until we could stand no more? We gave you what you wanted to hear to put us out of our agony. We gave you the lies that you lusted for, that Alexandros had persuaded us to run you through with a spear while hunting. And then you had us thrown into the sea. Here, my lord, I have a present for your generosity." First Jucundus and then Tyrannus took their chains off and laid them on Herod's lap. Stepping backwards, they dissolved into the shadows. Alexandros now spoke. "You were especially jealous of me, were you not, my dear father? I was youthful and beautiful. The more popular I became with the people, the more deadly became your poisonous jealousy against me. And so you looked for any pretext. Eurycles bribed your scribe to forge a letter to the commander of the fortress Antonia, falsely asking to give me refuge there after you were slain. He turned to another bloody apparition standing in the lamplight. And here, dear father, is the commander of the fortress whom you had tortured. But he said nothing to incriminate us. This figure shuffled forward, limping and in pain. He mounted the steps to the throne and laid his chains upon Herod's lap. Aristobulus now mounted the steps to the throne and stood also looking down at Herod. All of our entreaties about the truth and all of our counterproofs were rejected. Logic and arguments were no match for your poisonous lies. We had no chance. You petitioned the emperor for leave to execute us. He cautioned against it, but you disregarded his counsel. First you had us imprisoned so that your hatred could fester and poison your thoughts. You feigned a reconciliation when you were petitioned by the king of Cappadocia to show mercy, pleading for his son-in-law, Alexandros. You summoned another tribunal and escalated your lies against us. You were looking for vindication, for proof where there was none. Your minions were carefully selected to guarantee a verdict. You barred us from attending our own trial. The trial ignored all the basic legal procedures. We were never allowed to face our accusers or question them. This was a show trial. Tell me, dear father, why did you bother? And why not just slit our throats in a dungeon somewhere? Were you afraid? Did you think that you would be blamed? Did you think that farce of a trial would smooth over the lies? Alexandros now spoke. Dear father, surely you remember the other scores of officers and soldiers from your own loyal army that you now purged in fear that they would seek to revenge these injustices. From their shadows there now came forward another ghostly host of figures in military formation, shuffling forward. One by one they mounted the royal dais and piled their chains around Herod to the point where the throne was half buried. One by one they receded back into the shadows. Aristobulus and Alexander now took off their golden chains and piled them on top of the others. They stepped down from the dais and turned to face Herod. Dear father, blighted soul, said Alexandros, we are not even yet at the end of the story. For after you had us strangled in the dead of night and secretly buried far, far away, you still had another son left, didn't you? And he was the one most like you. And now you shall hear from him the next part of how our loving Father honored his sons. Alexandros and Aristobulus now bowed to Herod and, gliding backwards, disappeared into the darkness. Herod, oppressed by the weight of the iron and gold chains piled onto him, panted for breath. Sweating, eyes wild, he looked at Antipas. He said, in between shallow breaths, "Now you too." Dear loving father, I thought I had played that well, just like you would have. We are very much alike, you and I, said Antipas. You were the one who named me Antipas. And what does that name mean? For all, against all? It all fell into place, just as I had planned it. My two great rivals are out of the way. They were no more obstacles to my succession. Herod groaned. You deceived me. You were the author of all of this tragedy, said Herod. Me deceive you? Antipas exclaimed. Why, dear father, you deceived yourself. I merely served up the meal, and you desired to partake of it. Did you revel at the feast? Your deepest desires were satisfied. I was merely the chef. You lie, cried Herod. Well, I learned that from the very best, my father of lies. But I do admit that I did miscalculate one thing. You turned on me. I poisoned your brother Pararas because I thought it would please you. Instead, dear father, you had me arrested because you thought that you would be next. Antipas now mounted the dais and stood towering over Herod, who was covered in chains. Antipas laid his golden manacles onto the pile with all of the others. And, of course, dear father, you were right. I thought it was fitting that you should join your beloved Mariamne and your Hasmonean sons. You see, I am so much like you. Do you want to see your soul in me? Antipas leaned forward, the ghostly white of his face turning gray and then gradually turning black, so black that no light could pass through it. The black shadow now reared up and spread a cloak of complete and utter darkness over Herod. The chains were moving like great iron and gold snakes, engulfing him, squeezing the life out of him. Herod screamed and screamed for the longest time in the utter darkness. But then there was light. He felt a touch. He opened his eyes. Herod awoke, drenched in sweat, sprawled on the floor beside his throne, his torn garments scattered about. The dawn was just breaking, its sallow light beginning to filter through the high windows in the great hall. Nicholas of Damascus was gently shaking him. "Kyrios! Kyrios!" he was whispering gently. "Are you awake? Where have you been?" "To hell," said Herod. The chains were gone. He struggled to his feet, stumbling up the steps, and fell back into his throne, exhausted. "I think you were in a fever again, Kyrios," said Nicholas. Servants brought in towels and water. "Forgive me, Kyrios, but there is news of a strange event. There is a strange star that has appeared. It blazes by day and night in the eastern sky. I fear this firmament is the harbinger of great events. You must consult the sages to discern its meaning." "Star?" said Herod. "What star?" "All will be explained, my liege." Music for Chapter 15. Epic Sound, Mysterious Forest by Howard Harper Barnes. Epic Sound, Our Final Mission by Christopher Mo Ditlevson. Epic Sound, Waltz of the Dead by Mike Franklin. Epic Sound, Tales from the Grave by Mo Ditlevson. Epic Sound, Pet Cemetery by Mike Franklin. Epic Sound, Progression by Christopher Mo Ditlevson. Epic Sound, Haunted Mind by Etienne Roussel. Epic Sound, No Rest for the Weary by Anthony Earls. Epic Sound, They Come at Night by Etienne Roussel. Ben Sound, Ophelia's Dream. Ben Sound, Danger by Alexander Vazinin. Epic Sound, Last March of Heroes by Grant Newman. Epic Sound, Story with No End by Trailer Works.